I love storytelling. My family are very active, vivid storytellers. So you can't get a word in at the dinner table. So I think my interest in figuration really came from wanting to use painting as a way to tell stories and really wanting to engage people in narrative. The time that I went to art school, figuration was not very in vogue, and I think I got a bit discouraged from making the kind of paintings that I wanted to make. When I finished my undergrad, I still felt a lot of external pressure to kind of figure out what I wanted to do for work. I ended up studying overseas at the Rhode Island School of Design. I wanted to do something I'd never done before. Textiles kind of started as a way for me to be able to make things that were really big in a way that I knew how. I knew how to sew. I went back to the thing that I had initially really loved, which was figurative painting. And I was able to approach figurative painting with this material knowledge that I had developed through sculpture and this real big interest in materiality and what kind of stories materials hold. Sitting in front of a blank canvas is a really difficult thing, and I'm interested in setting parameters for myself that inspire me. The fabrics really do that. You'll see from looking around my studio that I do have this extensive library. The material is the paint, if that makes sense. It hasn't happened in a long time that I've been looking for a color and I haven't had it because, you'd be surprised how much stuff you get given. Everyone kind of knows that I'm that person who's looking for their old things. So sometimes you really just need yellow. And sometimes that yellow is there's a gingham yellow tablecloth that was in my last show that was my best friend's family tablecloth, and we sat around it for 20 years. And that felt like a starting point for a work. And sometimes someone gives you an old yellow raincoat that you don't really remember, and that's just yellow. I am always kind of thinking about my materials as an archive or a way of being able to create a palette over time. So it's not I start a work and I go looking for materials. I'm always collecting materials. And then when I go to make a work, it's really responding to what's already here. And I think having things just sort of organized kind of by color, but without too much restriction, just means that, when I'm making something and I'm in that moment of, it's similar to being able to mix something really quickly on a palette. I kind of am going and grabbing from what's already there. This is a little bit of that gingham I was talking about that was my best friend's family tablecloth that's in a lot of my work from last year. It's very sentimental and it has a lot of stains that I made, so it's nice to be able to remedy that by making them work. And I think there's something really interesting in that, in the fact that these works are really thinking about the interpersonal and intimacy and community and the ways that we're all kind of this collective conglomerate of everyone that we interact with. So all of these figures are made out of the clothes of this broader community. I have an amazing collection of art history books, mainly modernist painters, but a whole range, and I spend a lot of time looking at those. And when I'm kind of in that kind of idea generation mode, I spend a lot of time on the Met archive, just a lot of looking. I'm always screenshotting paintings. I have a lot of historical references at all times. I think you create a bank in your head of references that you don't know you're drawing on. The more paintings you look at, the easier composition becomes. I always start with drawings, and sometimes the drawings happen in life with my friends, kind of hanging out and I'm drawing, or I'll take a picture and I'll look at it later, or I'll be drawing from a book in here and then show it to my friends, and then I'll get them to pose in that way. I think that the style that I'm interested in working with is abstracted in a way that I don't think anyone ever feels like it's a direct representation of them in the way that it would feel if they were posing for a photograph. I'm not interested in photorealism. I'm not trying to capture a likeness. I'm trying to kind of stylize a representation that feels like how that person feels. And then those drawings come back to the studio, and when I'm kind of happy with the composition, I scale it up. And from then onwards, it's this process, which is very similar to the way that you would build up an oil painting. It's kind of looking for the architecture of light and dark in the form and kind of keep adding more layers of fabric, I love to work with bits of translucent kind of mesh or tulle or opaque like skirt linings, because then I can very tenderly kind of build the bridges between different colors. The final layer, I would say, is kind of close to glazing. They're very translucent pieces of fabric that are layered to create those smaller variations in tone. And then using the sewing machine again, I'm kind of changing colors of thread and doing kind of smaller details, sometimes with hand stitching and sometimes just with the sewing machine. So the works are so dense, they're really heavy, and you can probably even see that the way that this moves looks different to the way that it would move if it was a single layer. There's so many layers of fabric, it's quite taut, and especially the moments that are featuring humans, there's so much detail and density that like the fabric is so heavy and thick. There's just so many layers to the point where it often just like breaks my sewing machine needles, which is the point where I kind of know the work's finished because I just can't sew through it anymore. What I think is really interesting about this work is that the threads and the fabric are physically creating the surface. So you can't really pull apart what's the illusion and what's the structure. It's textiles about painting, or painting through textiles. It's this deep relationship. Montaigne and I met in a share house. They used to live with a friend of mine, and we became very quick friends. I think something that made making this work really lovely was trying to create a portrait of someone who is so publicly known in a certain way and has so much stage presence and has this huge persona, who you know in the context of playing video games on a Tuesday night and making soup. There's something really lovely about acknowledging that Montaigne is a huge part of who Jess is, and it's not this separate identity. How can I create a work that really tries to encompass all of those layers of this person that I'm really lucky to know? The pose that Montaigne is seated in is appropriated from a painting by Egon Schiele called Seated Woman with Bent Knees. It's a painting of his wife Edith, and it was really shocking when it was painted because Edith is sort of sitting on the floor in her underwear. It's this very androgynous kind of pose. Her arms look elongated and distorted. Jess and I chose it on one level because it felt like it played with gender in a way that they are interested in. But on another level, I'm really interested in looking at kind of contentious figures in art history whose work I really love, and trying to navigate that duality of being really uncomfortable with what I know about them and also really appreciating their work on a kind of aesthetic and artistic level, and just kind of trying to navigate what we do with that. And I think a lot of the things that I've been trying to talk about through my practice for the past few years have really been centered on painting. And I think something that for me really allows me to kind of gesture really directly towards the painting is the stretched canvas that we all recognize. And so by creating these kind of cutouts or openings, it's drawing so much attention to the fact that it's a painting that it kind of pulls it back into that material history. The work for the Archibald Prize, the portrait of Montaigne, the cutout hole has been stretched with a piece of mesh, and that mesh has been painted on in the same way that the canvas has been painted on, but because it's a mesh surface, it's translucent. So you get this kind of lovely illusion where you kind of feel like the surface is being continued, which it technically is, but you are able to see through to the structure and break the illusion and kind of break through that dialogue around what is a painting. The painting in the work is very gestural. I've dragged a fork through the paint. If you look really closely, you'll see really kind of thin lines running through the oil paint. And that kind of gives this illusion that the paint is a textile. I've been thinking a lot about the word portrait versus this idea of figurative painting, and who gets to be in a portrait. When is a figure a stand-in for an idea or the artist's interest or a myth, and when are they notable enough to be labeled a portrait? This is the first time my work has been referred to as portraiture, but every work I've ever made is a portrait of someone. It's just they're not someone who's in the public sphere. And when people look at my other work, even though it's all portraits of close friends and family members, And, they're mainly women and queer people and their figures. And I think I'm really interested in those distinctions. Being part of something like the Archibald really brings up this idea of the portrait. I really was kind of entering hoping to be able to show the work, kind of be part of the conversation, but no part of me really thought that it even really had a chance of getting hung based on, how different my approach is. And also, it just didn't even enter my mind that I would have a chance of winning the Archibald Prize. The culture of something like the Archibald is changing, and that a first-time finalist can win and someone with a really different approach and perspective can win. I have absolutely no idea what an Archibald Prize winning portrait looks like, and I don't think anyone else does, and that's really cool.